My name is Mary Rednofsky. I'm a former college professor. In 2005, I was 47, and they thought that I had multiple sclerosis. An increasing number of problems were creeping into my life. I still didn't understand what was happening, and I kept on trying to compensate. You know, you take better notes, you write yourself messages, you put your phone on buzz to remind you of things. But everything became disorganized, and I was very neat and clean, and everything was in its place, and I could always find things. And suddenly, those little pieces were just kind of flitting away. And as a person with younger onset dementia, since I was 47 when I was first diagnosed, I'm very fortunate that I still have the ability to communicate fairly well. I think it's important that people know who we are. We are people with dementia, we are still humans, and we still are a part of society.
Hi, are you Mary?
I am.
I'm Jay.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Who's this?
This is Benji. To do an interview with someone like Jay for MemoryWell allows her to make a snapshot of me. It's not my whole life, but it's a snapshot of me. That's the kind of pictures that I chose, were things that remind me of how I felt at the time. Someone who looks at it can say, hey, there's something in here that I can relate to, or there's something in here that I can use to reach her if she's nonverbal, or if she's blind, or if she's in some way disabled in other ways.
Why don't we start with the first photo here?
Okay.
So what's this?
So when I was a little girl,
well, MemoryWell began a few years ago,
played an instrument,
and it actually began with my experience with my dad.
organ, and I sang.
My father had Alzheimer's. My mother passed away 6 years ago, and at that point, I'm an only child, I became his primary caregiver. And a few years ago, I had to move him into a home. And when I did, they asked me to fill out this like 20-page questionnaire about his life. And I remember sitting in this room thinking, like, who reads 20 pages of data points for the more than 150 patients or residents in that particular community? And so I brought them back the questionnaire blank, and I basically said, look, why don't you just let me write down a story for you? I'm a journalist, it's what I do. And so I wrote down his story for them. It was really short, simple. It was like a one-page, 500-word version of his life. Here's who he is. And they absolutely loved it. It really transformed his care.
Graham Newton Small, or Gray as his family called him, was born in a dusty Australian outback town called age 35 that he met Sue Tang, a young Chinese-Malay lawyer freshly arrived for a job with the United Nations Conference on Trade.
He was originally Australian, so when his staff, when the nurses knew that he was Australian, they would say, hey, look, there's a kangaroo. And he would be like, oh, where's the kangaroo? And he would look for it. So it just really helped them, like, redirect him when he was very agitated. Telling his story actually enabled caregivers to take him off of Seroquel eventually, so that he could be him and still walk around and still talk to people and still engage, but he would just be less aggressive and less violent because he felt he was understood, and he felt that people understood him and he wouldn't get agitated anymore. So at least for my dad, it really did have that effect for him, that he no longer needed those drugs.
B14. can sit here and put our feet up. Won't that be nice? Is that comfortable? And I'll read to you about Valley of the Kings. Okay, you ready to hear this? All right.
My name is Celia Hoke, and my husband is Charles, and he has Parkinson's disease.
So they had lots of pretty colors. You remember all that, don't you?
And so, what was he as a child? Would you say he was like as a child? I mean,
I would say he was probably a very precocious child.
Families love the experience of having a journalist interview them, and often for overburdened caregivers, this is the first time they've had the luxury of thinking about their loved one, you know, the good times back in the days, for months, sometimes years.
Charles was ever the adventurer. Indeed, he was raised an entrepreneur, a trait he probably inherited from his grandfather, Frank. After their marriage in 1967, Charles and Celia became adventurers together. Our
stories are very short. They're no more than a page, and that way homes can print them out. They can laminate them, put them up on walls, and they're easily digested. And because if it gets too complicated, it gets too hard. Imagine if you're somebody who has Alzheimer's or dementia like my dad. All of a sudden, these people are getting really intimate with you. And if they're a stranger, they're bathing you, they're feeding you, they're touching you, they're undressing you, and you're like, whoa, you know, like, who are you and why are you in my space, right? But if they can then say to you as they're doing this, so like, let's talk about how your mom taught you how to play golf when you were 8, or let's talk about your brother Jeff or your sister Cecily, then it makes you feel like at least reassured that you are where you're supposed to be, these people know who you are, and then it's okay.
Hello, Mr. Hoke. How are you? It's me, Janet.
Say hi to Janet.
Mr. Hoke.
Janet.
They're able not just to be kind and say sweet things or helpful things, but to say things that are meaningful to that particular individual.
How was your day? Look at me right here.
The more tools they have to help them in dealing with each individual, I think, that makes their job easier, but also it makes the life of the person they're caring for a little happier as well.
Didn't you used to plant those? Aren't they begonias? Yeah?
This is probably the last people in America, frankly, who will never have Facebook pages or who don't really live digital lives. And as they're getting sick, we're losing those stories.
Go round and up.
You realize that it's another chapter in life. My life has always been a series of chapters. I had fabulous, amazing adventures growing up.
All right, let's go.
If I remember them, that's fine. But if I don't, I'm still a person that can create new chapters. I won't remember everybody's name, but it doesn't matter. But what I remember is how happy I was with you, and I'm happy to see you again. And ultimately, I kind of think that's more important.